Such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Reverend Moore, you were one of, I think, the most recent American sanctioned by the Chinese Communist Party. And I've been wanting to talk to you about this for a while, but this isn't actually your big area of expertise. Your area of expertise is, religious freedom realities in the Middle East, which is incredibly topical right now. I think we should start there. So what is the situation right now in Afghanistan?
It is a catastrophe in every way you look at it. It's a human rights catastrophe. I mean, for decades, the world has worked aggressively to try to advance the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan, religious minorities in Afghanistan. It's all gone, in all likelihood. I mean, there's like this spin that this is a new Taliban. It's not a new Taliban. It's the same old Taliban. It's a national security crisis, a catastrophe. Every extremist in the world will look at Afghanistan being ruled by the Taliban on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 as a coup d'etat for extremism. Any person in the world that lives in a country where there are extremists, that country is now a more dangerous country. It's a geopolitical catastrophe. You have the Chinese Communist Party very keen on exploiting this crisis, using it to undermine the United States of America. You have Taliban leaders that were in Beijing just a few weeks before this happened, quite a conspicuous occurrence. You have a Taliban that now has a relationship with Iran that they previously didn't have when they were in charge 20 years ago. I mean, in every possible direct humanitarian crisis, a catastrophe. All the images that we're seeing, from this region. I'm an optimist, but I'm very pessimistic about what's happening in Afghanistan.
Well, and so what is it that you're hearing from the ground? Because you're actually in contact with religious minorities in the region, in the area right now.
Yeah, I mean, people are terrified, and they should be terrified. Just a couple of weeks ago, the President of the United States was saying, there's not a chance in the world that the Taliban is going to run over Kabul. The White House seems to be, trying to change the story, to spin a different narrative. But the fact of the matter is that there are plenty of people that would have left Kabul if they thought that there was any probability of these things happening. But these are real human beings. I mean, I heard from a group of Hazara Shia converts to Christianity. So
okay, you have to break this down for us.
I will.
Yeah.
So Afghanistan is a Sunni majority country, Sunni Muslim majority country, with a small Shia minority that is traditionally persecuted by some of the majority Sunni members of the country. And within that Shia minority is another group called the Hazara Shia, which are ethnically discriminated against. So you have, by its nature, a religious and ethnic group discriminated against, and a bunch of them, largely because of disillusionment with the behavior of the Iranian regime, have left their religion and converted to Christianity. So they're like walking around with a death sentence. And they have a bullseye in their back. They have left their community, their ethnicity, their religion, and to begin with, they were a part of a persecuted community, and they are desperate. They don't know what to do. And then you have the American citizens. The State Department was giving guidance to just get to the airport and supposedly giving comfort to people that were stuck in Kabul because we're coordinating with the Taliban. A Taliban that has 600,000 American weapons now. A Taliban with maybe 70,000 American vehicles now. Potentially hundreds of aircraft. Paid for by U.S. taxpayer dollars, some of the most sophisticated weaponry in the world. And our government is telling our citizens, just get to the airport and we'll take care of you? This is an incomprehensible situation. One of those citizens was a mom of 6 kids that I was hearing from over the weekend. Her husband was in the United States. This mom of 6 kids live in the United States. They traveled over to see family. The mom and dad are Afghans who received asylum in the United States because the father was a hero. He saved an American life 20 years ago. He handed his cell phone to an American woman who was hostage. She was able to contact the authorities. The United States Special Forces saved her life. The whole family has asylum in the United States. but they decided a few weeks ago, the mom and 6 kids, to go over and see elderly family in Afghanistan. And in the blink of an eye, from Friday to Sunday, the country's overrun by the Taliban. They made 4 attempts at the airport, one of which they got caught in Taliban crossfire. And finally, through a hole in the wall, and I won't say the details, but in a very disgusting, inhospitable route, this mom with her 6 little kids made it into the airport. And the first people they saw weren't even Americans. Thank God a British soldier informed the Americans about this family, and they sat in those conditions until they could get out of the country. This story has been repeated 1,000 times. It is not a good time for the United States. It is a catastrophe for the Biden administration, whatever they try to say about it, and members of Congress need to hold them accountable for it. I also am entirely confident that any adversary of the United States of America that thinks that this catastrophe means the United States is any weaker will discover that we aren't any weaker, because the American people will hold our government to account and assure that our citizens received what they deserved from their government to begin with. But this is, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, a Taliban flag will fly over Kabul. And it didn't have to be this way.
You said you don't think this is new and different Taliban, which is some of the messaging that I'm seeing. Why? And in the context of you having been on the U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, so 6 years doing this work and being very familiar with this area, why do you think things have not changed?
The whole premise that the Taliban has changed is based upon words the Taliban is using in their press conferences. They have a couple of spokespersons which have exquisite English. Maybe one of them grew up in the UK or something. And I can understand, people watching this and saying, well, this is a different Taliban. They're talking about inclusive government, rights of women, and all of these things. But if you go back and look at what the Taliban said in 1996, which was the last time they took over Afghanistan, it literally is a copy and paste of the words that they're saying in press conferences now compared to the words that they said in press conferences then. And then not to mention outside of Kabul, in other parts of Afghanistan, we're already seeing some of the worst vices of the Taliban, 20 years ago. And so, Americans and the international community and others should not take any solace in these pristine English words coming from press conferences that are basically meant to buy time. And they're modifiers of those words. They'll say, we'll respect the rights of women, and women can have jobs, within the context of Sharia law. And of course, there are lots of interpretations of Sharia law. The largest Islamic group in the world is a group in Indonesia. They're called the NU, in slang. They have an exquisite interpretation of Sharia law, which affords women's rights and humanitarian concerns and promotes religious freedom for minority communities. This is not the interpretation of the Sharia law of the Taliban. The Sharia law of the Taliban is the most egregious form of Islamic interpretation. It is, by its nature, discriminatory. And the United States government should not be carrying the water for Taliban propaganda. Can the Taliban change? Maybe they can change. Is this a changed Taliban? Not in my assessment, and not in the assessment of any religious freedom advocate or human rights advocate or expert in Islam that I know. There is no indication that it's a changed Taliban.
What about apostasy? How does that work under the Taliban exactly? Apostasy, just to clarify, when I'm talking about people deciding to convert to a different religion. Here in America, there's no issue. You just go do it. But that's not the case everywhere in the world.
No, you're going to die. You're going to die if you change your religion. You're going to die by mob justice in the outskirts of Afghanistan. And again, this is different now. Back when the Taliban sheltered Osama bin Laden, they didn't control the whole country. They control more of the country now than they did then. These apostasy laws, and by the way, they don't just exist in Afghanistan. They exist in many countries around the world, like Pakistan.